You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Friday evening, joined by Kevin Symonds and also Father Charles Murr. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you.
You?
Yeah, Kevin, welcome back.
Well, thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Indeed. Well, Father, it seems like you have a pretty interesting background from what I saw when I looked you up. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's sort of all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah. It seemed like it, but it was really interesting. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the topic.
I always say 8 children. One brother died when he was born, actually. But I'm the oldest of 7 children from St. Paul, Minnesota. Good family, great parents, good upbringing, good Catholic education. A very good Catholic education, was outstanding. And after I finished college, I wanted to go on to study philosophy. All of the lawyers, my father had lawyer friends. They would golf together. And I remember the discussions that these lawyers would have when they would come over to our house. And they all held, in those days, this is the 1950s and 1960s, degrees in philosophy, all of them, from the different colleges, because it was a requirement. It was pre-law. They knew a little bit of Latin and a little bit of philosophy, enough to get to be dangerous. I wanted to be a lawyer, I thought. And so I wanted to get a classical education in philosophy, and I went to Rome as a lay student and started studying philosophy at the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And I was accepted as the only lay student at the Pontifical Mexican College, which is in Rome. And if I can just explain to people who might not be acquainted with such things, most of the Catholic countries, or countries with a sizable Catholic population, have a college in Rome for student priests who are preparing either to teach in seminaries or for greater degrees, for postgraduate degrees. Anyway, the Mexican college had just opened up, and the rector there, Father Carlos Torres, God have him in his heaven, a great man, accepted me as a student. So I was the token gringo in that. What are they calling it today? Sister. Whatever. I'm trying to be clever, and you can see that I'm battling at that.
You got me on that one.
Systemic racism. I was the token gringo in that thing. They were all of the rest were Mexicans, and they were great men. We studied together, and in 1974, that was in 1971, 72. In 1974. Another addition to that college arrived in the person of Monsignor Mario Marini. You think I'm a colorful character? No. This man was something. He was about the size of a refrigerator. Wonderful smile, great laugh. He was a civil engineer, had a doctorate in civil engineering from the University of Bologna. Came from a family of devout atheists, all of them, Marxists, communists, members of the Communist Party, and active at that. Who, when he announced, Kevin was a little bit shocked at this, and it is shocking. When he announced after he finished his doctorate in engineering at the University of Bologna, at his coming out party that his parents gave, and they invited all of the prime damoiselles of Ravenna he's from, so he could start his life. He announced that night that he was going into the seminary in Milan. And that caused quite a furor. The house was full of guests, packed with guests for his graduation, for his doctorate degree. And his mother, in front of all of the guests, if you can imagine this, his mother slapped him across the face after he made the announcement that he was going to the seminary and said, better a whore for a daughter than a priest for a son. With that, he left for the seminary the next day alone. He went into the seminary in Milan, and he had no funds. He had no support from his family or anything else. And when the Archbishop of Milan heard about this young man from Ravenna, the Archbishop of Milan sponsored him. He started a scholarship and sponsored this man as his own student for Ravenna, but him paying all of the studies. When he had finished his studies and was ordained, he encouraged Mario Marini to continue on his studies in Rome, which he did. He went to the Gregorian University and obtained a doctorate in theology from the Gregorian. And the man who was sponsoring him was the Archbishop of Milan, who was Montini, who later on became Pope Paul VI. And when Pope Paul VI became Pope, and Monsignor or young Father Marini had finished his studies at the Greg, he invited him to work in the Secretary of State. Anyway, Marini went to Mexico for 3 years and taught in the seminary in Chihuahua for 3 years, and then came to Rome. And he lived in the Mexican college because he had just been in Mexico, and started working at the Secretary of State. That's where I met him, at the Mexican college, and that's where our friendship began and developed. I guess you have to know all of that to make sense of any of the rest of it, all right? But we developed a great friendship, and his doctoral dissertation in theology, as a matter of fact, was on friendship, right? As was mine later on, and also in psychology. But that was the beginning of that friendship, and I guess we'd take it from there. But anyway, those are the groundworks, right? The ground is covered.
And I have quite a few questions, but I'm going to let Kevin jump in here as well, because I know he has some comments and questions as well. So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying I have some photos of Marini if people want to have a quick visual on them. Let me. Oops. Let's see. Do I?
Oh, you have photographs of him?
Yeah, the ones that there was that one that you had taken of him in Rome that made it on some website, I think.
Oh.
Does it show yet?
No, not yet.
No.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yes.
That's Marini. And then there was another one. I don't know if this was you or from somebody else, but
this is someone else. But this is later. This is shortly before his death, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Just so people can have a visual of what Marini looked like. Yeah,
he was a real person, all right.
Yes.
Well, one question that I'm seeing coming up in the chat here is, has it now been proven that Bugnini was indeed a Freemason?
Oh, do we want to jump right into that?
Let's jump into it, because that's been the burning question for about a month now since Kevin did a show a while back on it. So go ahead and jump in if you want.
It's a complicated answer because it's coming from a few different directions. However, let me just say this. In 1975, Pope Paul VI, while Mario Marini is in the Secretary of State, Pope Paul VI commissioned through, at that time, Archbishop Benelli, his Deputy Secretary of State, commissioned a visitation of the entire Roman Curia, because a lot of very disturbing allegations had come to him, had come to the Pope by very responsible people. These were not just nonsensical things. They were substantial, and by people who were very serious. The two cardinals in particular. They were disturbing enough for the Pope to ask that an entire visitation, papal visitation, be done of the entire Roman Curia. Let me just explain that to people who are listening. A papal visitation can be called for any institution or institute in the Catholic Church, any seminary, any religious congregation, any religious group of people, any college, anything that the Church has control of, to be investigated from A to Z. Normally, what the Pope will do is commission one particular man. He's usually a bishop or an archbishop, and he is called the apostolic visitor. Excuse me. It's called an apostolic visitation, and the man who leads it is the visitor, the apostolic visitor. He investigates a situation or a place or people in the name of the Pope. He's representing the Pope doing this. So when the Pope called in 1975 for a visitation of the Roman Curia, what he was in effect calling for was a visitation of all the people who work directly for him in the federal government of the Church. You cannot imagine how upsetting this was to an awful lot of people at the higher ups, that they would be investigated for anything, that they would be investigated. So the investigator, the visitor, was a French Canadian who was the rector of the French of the Canadian College in Rome. Just as I was in the Mexican College, there's the American College, there's also the Canadian College. He was the rector of the Canadian College. His name was Monsignor Edouard Gagnon, Gagnon. Gagnon was a straight shooter, just no nonsense man, a wonderful person, a scholar and a saint. I can say that easily and most truthfully, a great man. He was commissioned by the Pope to do this study, and he investigated the entire Roman Curia. He spoke to everyone who worked in the Vatican, who worked in an official capacity, from the Secretary of State, literally down to one of the men. His name was Giovanni, who swept St. Peter's Square. So it was the whole was a totius quotius, the whole kit and caboodle. It took him 3 years, this investigation. After about a year of the investigation, all of a sudden, Bugnini was promoted to Iran. You know how promotions work in Rome? No, you promote to eliminate. Right? Yes. This is really the truth.
Removeatur ut removeatur.
Removeatur. There you go. It's a strange thing, but when you're a bishop, I guess it's not a strange thing. It just is. That's the way it is. When you've made bishop, you're a bishop. That's it. That's not going to be taken away from you. In the case of McCarrick, this is incredibly an exception, an amazing exception. However, when people were to be let go, they weren't let go if they were not 75 years of age. They were promoted. Bugnini was promoted to Iran. I believe that in Iran there was something, I don't have my facts and figures here, but there was a very minimal Catholic presence, mostly diplomats who worked there. Some Iranians were Catholic, but to be promoted, to be taken out of the congregation for the culto divino and moved to Iran is believe me, not a promotion at all. That was 1 year into the investigation of Gagnon into the Curia. And what happened was that two cardinals, I don't think I'm going to give their names. I would rather not do that, but they're there and they're real. But Kevin knows them also.
Well, Father Murray, you mentioned them in the.
Did I already mention them? All right. Staffa and Oddi. All right. Cardinals Staffa and Oddi went. Cardinal Staffa, imagine, is the head of the Supreme Court of the Catholic Church at that time, of the Segnatura Apostolica, which would be the equivalent of the Supreme Court. He went, and Cardinal Oddi with him, both of them, to see the Pope with documents that had come to their attention, serious documents, alleging. They didn't allege. The documents were documents that showed. They were documents that verified Bonini's membership in the Masonic Lodge of one of the Masonic lodges of Italy. I get a little bit nervous when I talk about this stuff because I don't want to leave out anything, and I'm at the same time, I don't want to give too much of it because it bogs down the whole argument. This was brought to the Pope's attention. It was such a serious matter that the investigation was called for. This is Kevin. What did you bring up? The smoke of Satan. You want to give that quote and where it's from and what year?
Yes, Pope Paul VI talked about on June 29th, 1972, about how there was basically he thought that the fruits and all the stuff, the good stuff that the people had thought from Vatican II, it was all getting choked. And he said that this wasn't anticipated, nobody foresaw this. And so he was basically talking about how something happened that choked all of this. And he said that he called it the smoke of Satan. I'm trying to pick out the quote here. I have it in my St. Michael book. Yes. Referring to the situation of the church today, the Holy Father affirms that he has a sense that, quote, from some fissure, the smoke of Satan has entered the temple of God, end quote. There is doubt, incertitude, problematic, disquiet, dissatisfaction, confrontation. There is no longer trust to the church. They trust the first profane prophet who speaks in some journal or some social movement, and they run after him and ask him if he has the formula of true life. And we are not alert to the fact that we are already the owners and masters of the formula of true life. Doubt has entered our consciences and it entered by windows that should have been open to the light, etc., etc. That's like direct from the book in question, the book itself. That this is the English translation. It was written in Italian, but that's what Paul VI was talking about there.
Well, at that time, Paul VI had received these complaints, these serious complaints about Bonini, and there was also there was a general distrust of Bonini as things were developing in the church, because what was happening, you know this already, and I'm sure you've covered it on many of your programs, probably, the disarray in which the liturgy found itself, the experimentation all over the doing this, doing that, just the craziness, and it was all being tolerated. It was all being tolerated. And there were good Catholic people, good Catholic cardinals, good Catholic bishops, priests, religious and laity, who were getting very upset about what they saw happening to the church. In other words, the erosion of the Catholic faith. That's what they saw happening in the liturgy. But also these two cardinals came across these materials and they were brought to the Pope's attention. The Pope had that investigated. Cardinal Gagnon he was later made a cardinal. So if I slip and say Archbishop Gagnon or Cardinal Gagnon, we're talking about the same person. Gagnon did an investigation. 1 year into that investigation, Bonini was transferred to Iran. Yes, yes. To answer your question, I think there's that's proof enough. Now, if you're going to ask, do I have the documents? Can I show those to you? No, I can't. I can't. I don't know. I'm sure they exist, and I'm sure they're hidden away somewhere, but I can't show them to you. I do know that that's what happened. I lived with Cardinal Gagnon. He was one of my best friends in life. We spoke even after our years in Rome. We spoke once a week by phone. He came to visit me in Mexico. I accompanied him to Beirut. We were very good friends and very close. I know that's what happened. So yes, there was a problem. There was something else that happened too, and that should be mentioned. You had another character by the name of Virgilio Noé, who was the Pope's ceremoniero, the master of ceremonies for all of the pontifical masses and events. Noé was a Monsignor at that time. He had the Pope's ear, of course, for several times a day. There were different ceremonies. He also worked with Bugnini, under Bugnini, in the congregation. And I'm sure that there was a lot of prodding from Monsignor Noé to get Bugnini out. That's also part of it, to get him out. And when he got out, Noé was put into his place, got that place. And the irony is that things were just as bad with Noé as if Bugnini hadn't been moved at all. They were just as chaotic. But anyway, that's where we're going. To answer your question, isn't that a long way around answering a question? I'm sorry for that, but yes, I think there's certainly proof enough. I don't have the documents, but they do exist, and they were fundamental in getting him changed, promoted. Yes.
Do you think that, we often hear that there was and still is a major problem when it comes to Freemasonry in the church? Do you think that in light of what you've seen, there's some truth to that?
Michael, let me answer this way. We were educated. We grew up knowing that Freemasonry was against the law of the church. You could not be a Freemason and be a Catholic. We knew that. Every school child knew that, right? However, when I went to Rome, and I'll never forget the first time Mario Marini, who was in the Secretary of State, very close to Benelli, very close to the Pope, spoke to me sincerely, very seriously one evening about the Freemasons and their presence in the Vatican. I didn't know how to react. I think I laughed because it sounded so ridiculous. It sounded, it's conspiracy. It's conspiracy thing. I'm an American. I'm open-minded. The tolerance that we had for Protestants, Jews, Muslims, Freemasons, whatever, we tolerate. This is part of our makeup. It's a different situation in Europe. Let me just say that right off. It's very, very different. The European mentality and the setting of Europe for all of these things is quite different. The tolerance isn't there. It's not there. Marini told me about this. I laughed, and I accused him of being a little bit crazy. I remember saying that. You imagine, I was only 24 years old, and I'm telling the Monsignor, who's the secretary of the Pope, that he needs help to believe such things. I came to believe them. And especially after I got to know Cardinal Gagnon, Archbishop Gagnon, very well. He preached at my ordination in Rome. No, there was no question but that they existed. I would tell viewers also, and that they've infiltrated the church. There's no question of that. There's just no question of that. The mentality of the Freemasons as a religion, because I really think that Freemasonry is a sort of religion. It has its own liturgy. It has its own belief system. Its general umbrella of belief, if you will, you can believe just about anything and be a Freemason. That pretty well covers what we have in modernism in the Catholic Church. It's amazing how they go hand in hand. It just is. And it's not a coincidence, I don't think. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. Yes, Freemasonry exists. It's infiltrated the Catholic Church. Anyone who doubts that would do well to just investigate the facts regarding the Freemasons' attempt to bankrupt the Catholic Church in the early 80s with what you called the Vatican bank scandal. This was the first scandal. The first scandal was major, with Marcinkus in charge of the bank. Was a very naive American who really didn't understand most of what was going on. But the Freemasons of Italy took the Vatican bank as their goal to destroy and to bankrupt, so that they would bankrupt the church's finances. Now, you can say that's crazy. All right. Some of them are still in prison. Others committed suicide. Others were murdered. The ones who were in prison, unless they've died, were put in prison because the official charge is the Freemasonic attempt to overtake and collapse Vatican finances. That's the charge. They're mentioned as Freemasons. And it was the P2 or the P2 Freemasonic Lodge of Italy. And they were very serious. These are anti-Catholic. Let me just paint one thing that I remember seeing years ago when I was still thinking this conspiracy thing was ridiculous. I was in northern Italy, not far from Ravenna, and there was a funeral. And I was right across taking a coffee, but across the way was a Catholic church. And there was a funeral coming down the street. It's a small town. And the band was playing, there was a band, a musical band playing a dirge. And the dirge was, if I'm not mistaken, it was like something out of a movie. What is it? Dun, 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 dun. It was amazing. I mean, Zeffirelli couldn't have programmed this if he wanted to film it. It was perfect. That's going on. They're coming by. And I remember the parish priest, because the man who had died was a Freemason and very anti-Catholic. The parish priest came to the doors of the church, and you could see him from the inside, and he closed the doors and locked them as the funeral procession passed by. This is what went on. Now, you wouldn't find this happening in the United States if a Mason died down the street and he went past a Catholic church. No big deal. This was a big deal. It really meant that if that man didn't repent, that because he obviously was a Catholic, if he was an Italian, he was baptized. If he didn't repent before he died, he was damned to hell. And the symbolism was quite evident and quite stirring. It was quite the thing to see. This actually exists. And the reality of Freemasonry in Europe is a different one than it is here. We're not talking about the Shriners and people driving around little cars. This is not it. This is not it. This is the real. We used to say the real Megillah. This is the real deal, and they're serious. These people are very serious. Anyway, that's it.
I want to come back in a moment to some follow-up questions there, but I think Kevin, you had a question or a comment you were going to ask.
Well, I know Kimberly Hall asked a really good question here in the chat room, but kind of before we get into that, so Father, essentially what it sounds like you're saying is, the stuff with like Bunini or other issues, we talk about here in the United States about conspiracy theories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the great Catholic philosopher, Titan in her own right, Dr. Alice Jourdain von Hildebrand, who pointed out that over in Europe, they're much more open to conspiracies in the sense of believing them. But she also said, you all here in America are a bit more naive. I think she put it more politely than that. And I have to admit, in history, it's very true. Even the Roman Emperor Domitian, I think it was Domitian, once said, no one believes in a conspiracy against the emperor until it succeeds. And so it's like, after the fact, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, look at that. It happened. So how then would you say, what you're hearing you say is you didn't believe in these sorts of things too. You were kind of that naive American in a sense when in front of Mario Marini, when he was trying to tell you about the stuff, and you're just kind of like, no. But then things got real and you're like, oh my goodness, he was right all along. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's very much what I'm saying. I remember saying to Marini, I said that it's ridiculous. The whole thing is it's conspiracy philosophy. It's conspiracy. It's ridiculous. It's exaggerated. And he said to me something that I'll never forget. He said, the difference between we who believe in conspiracies and you naive who don't. And I said, what would that difference be? He said, we tend to outlive you by many years. Precisely because we're looking over our shoulders and you don't.
Yes.
Yes, there are conspiracies. These things are hatched. There are reasons. If you look through history, you see conspiracies constantly. The ones you find out about readily are the ones that fail. The ones you don't hear about are the successes. That's history, But yes, and Europe is very different with these things. It really is. Their history is very different with all of it. Yeah. The Masonic movements in history for the last 200 years of European history have been very, very important and very consequential. They just have been. Anybody who believes differently is really naive. But I was there. For years, I didn't buy this. I thought it's exaggerated. You're not. No. Until it wasn't, and I saw the evidence of it. I saw the evidence of it certainly with the Vatican bank scandal. Cardinal Gagnon foretold that. He told the Pope that this was going to happen. He told this to John Paul II after the 3 years of investigation that he made of the Roman Curia. He knew what was happening in the Vatican bank. It was disregarded. That's another topic for another time, maybe. But yes, these things they're real. They're not silly. They're not silly. What's silly is to ignore them. They exist. Yeah.
Yeah. Because this is why when Mr. Lofton was looking about how to title today's show, it was Living in Rome After Vatican II. That's the general title for tonight's podcast, as you know. But this post-conciliar period gets marked by so many of these conspiracy theories that it's hard to tell sometimes which ones are true, which ones might have a semblance of truth, which ones have a modicum of truth, and which ones are just flat out where are you getting this one from? For instance, the imposter Paul VI story that came out of Bayside, New York.
Yes.
I know you have a story about that. I hope maybe we can get to that a little bit later. But this is something that people want to know: is that what's the reality here? So for instance, one of the stories that we get is, if Bonini was a Freemason and he was, tinkering with the liturgy or up to some funny business, where does that stand? So we have one viewer that says, so how much influence did Bonini end up having on the Novus Ordo? Well, as the secretary of the Concilium, he had quite a lot of influence.
Tremendous amount.
Yeah. And so I guess what people need help with, and maybe you can help us and just kind of walk us through a little bit of your own thoughts on this and your own take, having been there, had a bird's eye view, dare I say, or front row tickets maybe. Help us walk through some of these things. how do we make sense of all of this? Like Kimberly asked, the stuff about with the Novus Ordo, and we know that there's this tremendous amount, but like, help us kind of have a balanced approach towards understanding these kinds of issues in relation to a lot of the turmoil that happened after the council.
All right. Let me give you that story, Michael. You might. I think you'll enjoy this. You'll find this interesting. I thought it was insightful. Right over Kevin's shoulder is a book by a very famous man. Yes, very famous author, The Godmother, and it's a series of conversations that I had over 8 years when I was in Rome. I was in Rome for almost 10. I was Mother Pasqualina, who was Pius XII's secretary for 42 years, was my godmother for ordination, and she was a very good and dear friend for 8 years, the last 8 years of her life. And we met frequently, probably 3 times a month. And she came to a lot of things. We knew each other very, very well. One time I went to go see her at Pastor Angelico's on the Monte Mario, where she lived. And she had just finished talking to some old friends from Austria. They came to Rome. And I said, well, that's very nice. And blah, blah, how were they? She said, they brought me a pamphlet claiming that Pope Paul was not Pope Paul, but that he was kidnapped and replaced with an imposter. And I started laughing, and I said, Mother, please don't tell me you believe that too. You're not by. She said, oh, of course not. Of course not. She said, but you know what bothers me? These people are so upset by what they see happening in the church that they're grabbing at anything to try to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. And you know what? That made tremendous sense to me. This is what it is
today too, because that's been my observation. Yeah. And it seems like, okay, there's a grain of truth sometimes to some of these things, but people are grasping at straws. They're trying to hold on to something because the crisis is so bad right now, but they end up holding on to things that isn't very helpful.
There are a lot of bizarre theories. There are a lot of bizarre theories. Yes. But what she said really makes sense, because what the real problem is that people see the faith being destroyed all around them, and they're trying to say, why? What happened? Right. Where can we find blame? Right. Well, right. This is it. Now, when you've got someone like Bugnini, who truly was dedicated to creating a mass. Look, I say the Tridentine Mass, and I love it. It's absolutely, it's integral to my spiritual life. It's beautiful. When I started studying, and this is only recently, I started studying really in depth the history of the Tridentine Mass. This is fascinating. It's fantastic. What a rich history. The centuries behind all of this to put this, it came together almost like a work of angels. It's fantastic. To one man waking up one day saying, I'm going to rewrite the Mass. I'm going to create a new Mass that's going to be accepted by Protestants, by Jews, by Muslims, by atheists, by Freemasons. Everyone will love this Mass. It'll be open to everyone. No one will find it offensive. Well, when such a person happens along and starts saying, the council says very clearly that not one word of the Roman canon is to be touched. He said, okay, all right, we won't touch a word of the Roman canon. We'll simply make up 4 new canons, and we'll call them Eucharistic prayers, or 3 new ones. Right? And then,
Father, I don't mean to interrupt you, just real quick.
Go ahead.
You talk about how you say that he was trying to create a Mass that was not going to be offensive to different people, right?
Yes.
Is that not itself, or do you think you could make an intelligent argument or observation that in and of itself is Freemasonic? Because don't Freemasons accept anybody from any religion in their ranks?
Not only do I think that, I believe that. Yes, I believe that. I think it's perfect, because this is what the Masons are all about. It's all inclusive. You want to believe in the Trinity? Go right ahead. You don't want to believe in it? Go right ahead. You want to believe in this? It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. As long as they've got this general umbrella that we can all fit under and all get along, and they're running the show, that's fine. This is the problem with it. This is the problem with it. And people saw their mass and their sacraments being diluted. Just that more and more and more water added to everything, to where you come out with, Michael, and you know this, you had a program on it about the 70% of American Catholics don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. Well, how did that happen? How do you think that happened? It happened by treating the Eucharist as if it's not important, as if it's just a general thing that anyone can accept. This is amazing. We also had something else that was going on during this time. This is the early 70s, all through the 70s, and these are the years right after the council. There was an awful lot of lacks of charity, a lack of charity on people's parts. Anyone who held to something that was a little bit traditional was, oh my gosh, it was you were name called, you were this, you were that. But you had something else that was happening that cannot go without being said. All of these changes that were coming, you had a type of bishop that already was in place, who, if he were left in place, would have been more prudent to accept the changes of the Second Vatican Council or of Concilium, of the changes wherever they were coming from, and apply common sense to it. But all of a sudden, something else happened. All of the bishops in the world were told to resign at age 75. I mean, we had bishops before the council who were in their 90s. They were in their 90s and functioning. Amazing. When they couldn't, they had other people functioning for them, but they remained. This was the patriarchy of the church. All of a sudden, the cutoff point is 75. And not only that, the new bishops who are being created are all of an ilk. They're all being created. They're all liberal-minded bishops. I wish I could find, maybe somebody can. It was one of the last interviews that the apostolic delegate Jadot gave before he retired from the United States. He was apostolic delegate to the United States. That means, among other things, that he's the one in charge of sending for each diocese that requires a bishop. The bishop died or the bishop is retiring. 3 names of 3 possible candidates to replace him. Well, Jadot gave an interview to Time magazine when he was retiring, and he credited himself, patted himself on the back for having given the United States of America, it was either 75 or 78 liberal bishops. He was very happy with that. Very happy with that. This is what I left you. This is the Holy Father's gift to you. Well, excuse me, between that and the chaos that's with the sacraments and the Mass, you had chaos everywhere. You had a lot of it.
What do you think the popes allowed this to take place?
That's a question for a whole nother segment. The psychology, seriously, the psychology of Pope Paul VI and of John Paul II. There's an awful lot of there are an awful lot of reasons. I think Pope Paul VI, who was Pope during this time, I really believe that he he believed in the responsibility of human beings, that people were going to act responsibly. He believed in their goodness, that people were basically good, that they would do the right thing. And it got completely out of control. It simply got out of control. He also made, as far as I'm concerned, a deadly mistake. Monsignor Marini, Cardinal Gagnon, Benelli, everybody agreed with this. When Humanae Vitae came out, and I think this is the pinpoint, and I think this is it. If I would have to say, this is the beginning of the chaos. When Humanae Vitae came out, before it was even public, a few days before, a number of priests, I wish I should know all of this, and I did know it at one time, I'm forgetting it. Let's say there were 6 or 7, maybe 8 priests protested in front of the annunciature, or not the annunciature, the apostolic delegates' residence in Washington, D.C. They protested this. I might have been wrong. Were the Beringers? I don't know. I don't want to even say that. I'm not sure. But anyway, they protested. Cardinal O'Boyle, Cardinal of Washington, D.C., suspended them ad divinis immediately. They were suspended for their protest against Humanae Vitae, which they had not read.
Sounds an awful lot like what's going on nowadays. I remember when a certain Supreme Court justice was being nominated, and they already, before the person's name got out there, they were already passing out the flyers, fill in the blank here, we're protesting. Sounds awfully similar.
But this with Humanae Vitae, these priests were suspended ad divinis. The Cardinal O'Boyle of Washington received a telephone call from the Pope asking that those priests be reinstated with no discipline. That was it. Goodbye. Goodbye. It was all done. The gates were open. The gates were open. There was a serious lack of discipline, and people detected weakness in leadership.
I've been saying
took
this
advantage of it.
For a while. There's been a lack of discipline, a lack of excommunications. That seems to be one of the root problems, but I still don't understand why that is the case. I don't understand why popes and certain bishops don't just come down and say, "I'm sorry, you're gone."
I agree with you, Michael, but here's something to look at. I just mentioned the achievement of Jadot, who was very proud that he left 78 in very few years, 78 liberal bishops. What did liberal mean? Liberal means that anything to the left of reasonable is permissible. Anything to the right is not. That's what it is, and that's exactly what happened. Why there isn't discipline? Why there isn't? I don't know. I think maybe, and this is where I can't enter, and nobody really can in good conscience. I don't know. I wonder about their faith. I wonder how deep the faith is. I'm serious about that. Maybe they have their own serious doubts, and because of that, they can't act. I don't know. I don't know. I've looked at some. I've known many bishops. I questioned some of their motives most sincerely, because I don't understand what it has to do with the faith and their concern for the faith. But I think a lot of these men are they're lacking faith. There's a lack of faith. They're not sure of themselves, and therefore they don't want to impose anything on anybody else. The whole idea of mercy, my God, mercy has been with us since God in the Old Testament and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ made such a stand in its favor in the New Testament. This is revolutionary, this mercy. This is nothing new. But when you say, let's have mercy and ignore other things that are happening, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. We get down to the psychology of each bishop, to the psychology of each pope, and it's difficult. When you look, however, the opposite side of that coin is, now this is the gospel according to me, all right? So take it with more than a grain of salt, please. But the opposite side of that coin is also when you have fantastic popes. This is amazing men who come up out of nowhere almost and take the bull by the horns and put the church where the church should be. Strong men of conviction of faith. This happens too. You know, so
I just don't see somebody like that being elected anytime soon.
Well, it's sort of scary when you see. I just told you about the apostolic delegate stacking the deck here by naming 78 liberal bishops. That was his big achievement. When you have somebody stacking the College of Cardinals,
sure, it's even worse.
That's why
I think the next pontificate is going to be rougher than the current one. So I don't think we're going to get a Leo the Great or a Gregory the Great anytime soon.
But you know, there was a time too, and Kevin and I have talked about Pius IX. You have to remember something too. Pius IX began as a liberal.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And only when they were trying to kill him, and he woke up to the fact that the Masons were at his door, they were right outside of his door to kill him. When he woke up to that fact, there was a great Jesuit who wrote a biography of Pius IX, and I was reading it. He said, when they were at the door to kill him, he escaped to Gaeta, and his life was saved. And the Jesuit, the author, wrote, "Thus ended his liberal period."
Right. Right.
You know, when we talk about this question of mercy and all dialogue and all this stuff, you know, I know a lot of people are questioning this now, but I think it goes back to really John the 23rd and that famous line, "the medicine of mercy." I think that kind of kicked off a period of what was supposed to be renewal, because there was a certain phase at the time. This is post World War II. People had realized the power of the atomic bomb, you know, all kinds of very serious questions. Humanity was a little rattled by all of that. And so some very serious questions would come up. And so when you read what John the 23rd thought about all of this, he thought that humanity was at a point where it would be better able to accept the gospel if we carpe diem, if we seize the day, you know, we take advantage of this moment. You know, I can't help but wonder, though, if St. Paul's words aren't applicable here. They talk about peace and security only then to have sudden ruin come upon them. You know, almost like, I'm going to say it, but almost like a misreading of the signs of the times. Sure. Or when you're playing a short game versus a long game. John the 23rd believed in so much of the goodness of man that I know, for instance, when he gave his famous address under the moon in 1962, it was very joyful, very hopeful, all this kind of good things were going to come, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward 50 years, just prior to his abdication, Pope Benedict is still on the throne of St. Peter, and he talks about how he's like, yes, we're now 50 years out from this, and he's like, we're more tamer now. I don't remember the exact word, but something to the effect of we've been what's the word? Tamed is on. I know it's not the right word, because we've realized that there's more to it than this. You know, we're more sharpened by the realities, et cetera, et cetera. And he talked about these things, and I sat there and I said, this is exactly what I've been trying to tell people, is that Pope Benedict specifically cited, we're more aware of the fact that there is original sin, and what that means in the practical order. And I sat there, and I nearly did a dance in my living room, because I was like, finally, someone said it out loud, So, like, I know back, this even comes up with questions like with Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the SSPX. For the longest time, we knew what happened after the famous meeting of Paul VI and Lefebvre, because they talked about it almost immediately afterwards. But then in 2018, a book came out written by someone who he was a priest. I think he was involved in the canonization of Paul VI. And they now they released the transcript of what happened during the meeting of Lefebvre and Paul VI. So in that spirit, when that was all happening, I sat there and I said, well, why don't we restore to the public, or at least to the English-speaking world, the before? So we had the after, we had the during now, and then I said, why don't we come up with the before? That had been published by Paul VI's good friend Jean Guiton in the book The Secret Paul VI. And I worked on it with a friend over in England, and we translated it from the French to the English. And now we knew what happened beforehand. And that was one of the things that Jean Guiton had said to Paul VI was, Your Holiness, me and other people, we don't understand something. How is it that you're talking about meeting all of these people and forgiving, et cetera, and yet you won't meet with Lefebvre? Mm-hmm. This does not compute.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and wouldn't you know it? Only days later, Paul VI decides to meet with Paul VI decides to meet with Lefebvre. Jean Guiton had everything to do with that, I suspect.
Yeah,
but we didn't know that beforehand.
That whole situation, I do think there were some issues with Lefebvre that were problematic. But why come down so hard on him and not the liberals? I mean, let's just be consistent.
Oh yeah,
that's what I don't understand.
Let me interject this.
Yeah.
This was another thing of the psychology of Montini, of Papa Montini, of Paul VI. He didn't do this. He didn't slap your hand on the right without slapping another hand on the left. Right? This was it. Before he suspended Lefebvre, he waited until there was a liberal cause. And I can't remember it exactly, but it had to do with the abbot of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome. The abbot did something crazy. I don't know what or made some sort of crazy statement. So he waited until that happened, and then on the same day suspended both of them. So you got the right and the left. See, this was his idea of a happy medium.
Well, maybe he was a little bit more balanced.
It's not my psychology. It's certainly not, and it always seemed to me the psychology of a weak man, of a not determined. That's all. And the problem with this, of course, is that the psychology of the Pope is the psychology of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It goes down. We have this pyramid, whether we want to admit it or not, it exists. And that's it. That's it. Anyway, you should also know, just to throw this in too, that when John Paul II finally decided to get rid of the man that Cardinal Gagnon insisted he get rid of, who was Cardinal Baggio, Sebastian Baggio, who was in charge of creating all of the bishops in the world, who created all of these liberal bishops. The way we use liberal also in the United States is quite different than the way they use liberal in Europe. Liberal means Republican in Europe, and it means liberal is not Republican as in America, but Republican with ideas, Republican ideas. And those Republican ideas are very, very Masonic. So when you use the word liberal in Europe, to a great degree, that's included. But we had the man who was in charge of creating bishops, who was Sebastian Baggio, was also accused of being a Freemason, and there was documentation to prove it. Well, finally they acted, and John Paul II ousted him. That took years to get done, years. But John Paul II.
Aren't you writing a book about this stuff, Father?
Well, now that you mention it, I am. I'm a little bit more than halfway through. The title is. I was originally, a working title was. I was going to have for the working title was going to be Of Rats and Men. However, I decided to change it to murder in the 33rd degree. That's what it is. But this Cardinal Baggio was creating all of the bishops in the world. And he was accused of being a Freemason, and John Paul II finally got rid of him precisely because of that. But he had been there for almost 12 years, naming all of the bishops in the world. You ask why there's such chaos? Well, that explains an awful lot. But when John Paul II wanted to speak to Lefebvre and wanted an investigation of Lefebvre, who did he call? Again, he called Gagnon. He called Cardinal Gagnon and asked him to go to Écon and to speak with Lefebvre and to see what the situation there was, which Gagnon did. I know he did because he invited me to go along with him. I was in Mexico at that time. He did a study of it, and much to the dismay of many people in the Roman Curia, he came back and he said, the seminary that he has is ideal. He says, the seminary there that they're running is wonderful. The esprit de corps is good. The sense of humor. For Gagnon, it was important always, as it is for me, that people possess a sense of humor. People, especially people with the faith. If you meet somebody who has the faith and no sense of humor, be careful. Be careful. You need those two things. And Gagnon said, I found good humor. I found good. The study was fantastic. The way of life, the devotion. He said, I would propose that it be used as a model for seminaries. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. Anyway, yeah, people want to hear what they want to hear. They don't want to hear what they don't want to hear. That's it.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Father Murr, I really appreciate your time and you coming on. I'd love to have you back on again because I have quite a few questions, but we're
do you really?
I do have quite a few questions for you. The Novus Ordo being a few of them. In fact, I saw some in the chat. I wish we could get to them, but the Novus Ordo in particular was a good one. But
well, let me just can I just say this?
Yeah,
I am not anyone who's going to say I'm not the one who's going to say that the Novus Ordo Mass is not valid. Please,
that was one of the questions that some people were asking. Is it evil and things like that?
No,
yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Nor is it evil. As a matter of fact, the Novus Ordo Mass can be celebrated absolutely beautifully in Latin and with dignity. It's fantastically, if you want to, or you can call in a clown.
Or you can abuse it,
or you can abuse it. That's right.
Unfortunately, that's part of the problem. Father Murr, again, I'd love to have you back on. You're welcome on anytime.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much, Kevin. Because I get nervous about these programs. I need a backup.
Please don't. You did great, and I'm gonna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time.
Yeah,
because there's so much that you can get into with all of this. Even more of like the inner workings with Gagnon. I mean, lots of good questions here. So yeah, I definitely have to have a part 2.
I would love to have a part 2. So we'll discuss that off the air. Father, did you want to put in a plug for? I know we've mentioned several of your books already. Anything else you want to put in a plug for?
No. I just that I'm really not an author. I've become one. It's sort of on the job training we used to call back in the 60s, right? But I wrote The Godmother really truly not to sell books. I got when I was turning 70, getting close to 70, I said, you know what? Somebody should know these things. I mean, I should really leave a record of what happened and what people said as best I can recall. That's why I wrote the book. So it wasn't to become rich. Besides, I'm not. So it didn't work even if it were going to be for that, right? But it was to leave what was said, because many of the things that woman knew for 42 years being Pius XII's secretary, she knew John the 23rd very well. She knew Paul VI. She knew all of these people. She knew Bugnini. So that's the reason I wrote it. And I think it's a pretty good book. It gives a lot of the detail that we were trying to get into today with the Rome post Vatican II. That's sort of it. That was the reason for it. Anyway, Michael, thank you very much for having us on. Kevin, thank you very much for moral support. You're the best. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sirs. God bless.
We'll discuss a part 2. God bless. And everybody, thank y'all for watching. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, share this on your social media. Also check us out, the little address there at the bottom, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, if you want to support us. Until next time, God bless.